Well, Pastor Bill will talk to you a little bit about this. He has a little envelope here with these note cards, and he'll explain why he wants you to have this. We put 5 in each one of these, and then there's spare on the table. Today's lesson, Pastor Bill, this is his handout, Herod, and this map, this colored map.
Could I have one of those?
Yes.
Just a borrow.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we got plenty.
And hi. What color would he like?
George, what kind?
George, what color would you like?
Give him the blue one.
So you want a blue? There you go.
Kind of a stereotype.
So the first 2 things are from Pastor Bill, kind of going on the lesson today. And then I found an article about Caesarea. And then I was at a thrift store yesterday and I found Israel Today. And there is, just as from the March article about a mosaic that I thought you might find interesting. And then in the February article, there was like about 6 magazines that I picked up. It's about Israel's population and how there's a tourist boom going on in Israel because the world looks upon Israel as being safe. So there's direct flights being developed all over the world going directly into Tel Aviv, like from Brazil and some other countries that wasn't before. And then this is just a reminder of our meetings, and our next meeting is October 21st. And then this is just a printout, kind of like what I've been giving you. It's from the website, but I thought it would be nice for you to have a printout what's from the website to look at, and including the travel protection insurance. So that's what's in your packet, and I would encourage you, whatever folder you want, but maybe bring this every time in case Pastor Bill or I have some handouts to give to you. Then you have it with you.
Excellent.
So should we do a prayer first?
Sure, I'll open us in prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we come with such joy and excitement as we anticipate walking on the ground where our salvation and our life was taken care of. And so bless us in our preparations as we get to know each other, as we get to prepare for this great trip. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Thanks, Lisa.
And then, yeah, we're doing icebreakers.
Yeah, real quick icebreaker.
Cool.
So Lisa, we're letting you choose what color you want. Okay. So we're just going to do a very light, easy icebreaker today, but we're going to be traveling together as a group, and we'll be a community while in Israel. And I know that last year, the people that went, there was some really wonderful friendships that were developed, and are still carrying on today. And it's also was great about how we came together as a group. And it's just fun. Every time I come to church, I see people that was on the trip. And we just have this special secret bond. So we want that for you as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to just get up for just a few minutes. We're going to go around and shake each other's hands, say shalom, and introduce yourself. And that's all you're going to do. Okay, so go ahead.
Shalom.
That's real.
Julie. Shalom.
Nice to meet you.
Shalom.
Shalom.
I have a cold.
Oh,
So I'm stepping back. Shalom from a distance.
Shalom.
I'm going to give it anyway. Shalom, Lauren. I'm Lisa.
I don't want to.
Shalom, Lisa. Shalom. Jane. Thank you. Welcome, Lisa. Shalom.
Shalom,
Lisa.
Shalom,
Miriam. Shalom.
Marilyn.
Shalom.
It's going to go away very fast.
What's your name?
Linda. I work for the school district. I'm blaming this on the 750 people I spent my days with. I'm taking it right away.
Oh, you got a cold? Shalom.
You don't want to
Virtual shalom.
Julie understands. It's not keep it going.
Shalom. Bill. Shalom, ladies.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah, I know what you mean by cold. I got over a cold and brought fast.
This is not bad, and I'm getting rid of it right away. I have decreed.
Okay, yeah, whatever.
Lay on the couch in about an hour.
Carol.
Oh, shalom, shalom.
I didn't shalom you. Shalom. So now it's Pastor
Nice
Brewster.
icebreaker. All right, so
Saw you nice.
we were gonna do the song now.
I thought, since we kinda did fire hose last week, maybe we just go right into your teaching.
Cool. All right, perfect. So
T-shirts right now?
yeah.
Again.
No, that was an informational meeting. So it's just so much information. So, all right. So yes. Let me say what I said in the prayer. What's that? Oh, it's on. Yes. Yep. That I am so thrilled and so excited about this trip. I know there's a lot of people who could not be here today, but we're with kind of real strong verbal commitments. We're over 25 now, and we've got 45 seats on an airplane, so reserved. But he'll let go of those. But hey, Sandy, and so just so thrilled and so excited about this trip, and all y'all who are going. So I want to explain. What we're going to do is we're going to do some Bible study and some background on each day. And so we're going to do day 1 today. But I want to explain something that I thought of, and with Sandy being a lifelong educator and kind of an expert in that field, I'm always getting, thinking about this. But here's the deal. When you go to Israel, you're going to go to a place. And there's a tour book. Thank you. There's a tour book that you'll have. I'm going to have a summary of each day with more detailed stuff that I'll give to you as we get closer. But in truth, you're not going to be able to grab your book and now I'm in this place, I've got to look this up. Really, the more you can pour in now, the more you're going to get out of it. And I went back to my experience in anatomy, physiology. Now you'll wonder, what are we talking about that? All right, so I won't go into a long story about it, but I learned there's one way to memorize stuff for me, and that's note cards. So you have, like, I'm going to have you write right now. Let me go to Caesarea and write Caesarea Maritima on. I would put it on the non-lined side. Okay, so take your deal and write, and the spelling is up there on the screen. Caesarea Maritima. Okay. Don't do Mount Carmel or Nazareth yet. Just put Caesarea Maritima. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some things that are significant about Caesarea Maritima. What I want you to do while I'm working on this is to write some things down. Just summary things that will jog your memory so that you can be sitting by the TV and you can pull out your nifty little packet here, because you're going to put these in your packet. You're going to keep building. You're going to keep loading this, and you can have it sitting at your table or at your dinner, and you're going to say, you can pull it out and say, now what's the significance of Caesarea Maritima again? And then you can go back, and you can keep doing this, and you can start putting it to memory, so that when you're there, it's there. You don't have to go looking for a book. This is just something I was thinking about, because I could come up with a piece of paper and I could hand it out to you, and then you'll lose it. Or we've got some wonderful articles and stuff like that, and you'll read it. But it's just an idea, and I'm thinking this might work. We'll see. So anyway, while I'm talking, fill up a card. If you fill up too many, we've got tons of cards here. So if you need more cards, do a second card, Caesarea Maritima continued or whatever. But think about maybe getting as much as you can on one card, circle it or whatever. Here's Denise. All right, so Julie, I'll let you take care of getting Denise her goodies. All right, so let's start. You could put HPPP, Herod, Pontius Pilate, Peter, and Paul. These are the people that I want you to think about when we get to Caesarea Maritima. And right there, what you're looking at is an aqueduct that Herod the Great created to bring fresh water into Caesarea Maritima. which is a port city that he built to honor Caesar. And it is the place that Christianity took off from the Holy Land. Paul took off from here when he went to Rome. This was the seaport where people entered and exited the Holy Land. So Herod the Great is an important figure. Now, I'll talk just a little bit about Herod, but in your packet, or did we put it in the packet? Yeah. So in your, you don't have to look at it now, but just know in your colored packet, or did we put it in this?
We put it in
Put it in the colored packet. So in the colored packet is a article on Herod the Great from a Bible dictionary that I have, and it's a good summary because it gets really complicated. Here's why. Herod the Great was the ruler when Jesus was born. But he dies like 4 AD, early when Jesus is just a youngster. But his sons get put in charge of various areas. And guess what they're called? Herods. So it's like, what Herod are we talking about? I've given you an article that'll help you with that. But so there's also a map there, and I've circled Caesarea, and so this map shows you where Caesarea is. And you can see that Joppa up there on the left on the coast is modern day Joppa. Joppa's still in existence. And this city here is where Peter has he's on a rooftop of the tanner's house, and he has that vision where he sees that all the foods are clean and they come down in this sheet. Well, that happens in Joppa. The centurion that we're going to hear about is from Caesarea. So, and then also Paul will be imprisoned in Caesarea. So, and we're going to read some of that. But anyway, so there you can see those are on the coast. Those are the entrance into the Sea of Galilee, down here into Jerusalem. So that's the place we're going to start because we fly into Tel Aviv, which is right above Joppa. Okay, so just we're there. And know that even if you want to write this on your note card, jet lag. Okay? So the first day, we are going to walk through Caesarea Maritima. This is going to be good because we need to stay awake. And we've got that adjustment and whatnot. So some of the pictures of what we'll see, I'll show you here. But one more thing about Herod the Great. Herod the Great, a few things if you want to write down some things about Herod the Great. He is the one that created the fortress on Masada that we'll see. He is also the one who redid the temple of Jesus' day. He remodeled it. He built this huge retaining wall, the Temple Mount. The western wall that we're going to go visit, that's just a portion of the retaining wall that he built in Jerusalem. Yeah. So the reason why I want you to think about Herod the Great is because Herod the Great still to this day is everywhere. Jerusalem, Caesarea Maritima, certainly Masada. We're going to be looking at a lot of places that Herod the Great built. Herod the Great was probably insane. He was horribly violent, although he wasn't that different than a lot of the rulers of his day. But a few things, this is a book. If you really want to go all out and find any book on Herod the Great, read it. Yeah. So yeah, this is one that I've been reading. It's pretty thick. It's pretty, but if you're a history buff, The Many Faces of Herod the Great, it's a recent book. And this person makes the case that what made Herod really great is he knew how to cozy up to the Jewish powers, and he knew, of course, how to cozy up to the Caesars. And in fact, Herod the Great, let me see if I can get this right, Mark Antony?
Yeah, that's what your thing says.
Yes. He buddied up to Mark Antony, and he was put in power. He was called the king of Judea. Well, Mark Antony gets taken over by Caesar Augustus. I think it's the order. And he was able to switch alliances. Because typically, you know, if you bet on one horse, and that horse doesn't come in, you're... But he was able to show the new Caesar, I'll be just as loyal to you. And so, man, he was a master politician. But he also was a kind of half Jewish. And you can read more about him. So he was very loved by the Jewish people because he redid the temple. And it was beautiful. But yet he also was corrupt. And so there was a love-hate thing going on for Herod the Great. So that's the first thing on your deal. Think about Herod the Great. Here's the aqueduct that he built that brought fresh water miles and miles and miles and miles and miles so that he could have fresh water in his seaport, Caesarea Maritima. And a lot of it's still there. This is what the harbor would have looked like in his day. It's kind of a, you'll be able to see this when we're there. Huge, and this is looking out, and it's not there anymore because it's all been eroded away. But he took this natural little harbor and created this amazing harbor in the 1st century. What the guy did building-wise was unbelievable. This is the place where they had chariot races in Caesarea Maritima. And we'll get to probably, most likely, walk by and see that and walk through this area. There is a huge palace. We don't even know that Herod actually ever stayed there. But a huge palace was built, and these are the remaining columns of it, and we'll be there. And you can see this is the Mediterranean. It's absolutely gorgeous. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a chance to swim in there. I did one of my trips. This is the amphitheater that you'll get to go to and see in Caesarea Maritima. A wide-angle view, so that's why it's a little distorted down below. But in Jesus' day, or when this was built, it was 2 or 3 times as high. So do like 2 more sections going up. So it was quite an amazing creation. Okay, so now on your card, or even if you want to make a new one, we're going to talk about, I've done Herod the Great, we're going to talk about Pontius Pilate. And why is that, why is he important in Caesarea Maritima? I think it's about 20 years ago, as they are doing excavations and continually doing stuff, they found this stone. This is a replica. The actual one is in a museum in Jerusalem. And what you see here is inscriptions, Pontius Pilate, procurator. We have, this is from the 1st century. They found this stone. It was actually repurposed and set down, you know, with the writing down, so it preserved the writing. They were doing, I forget exactly the nature of how they found it, but they found reference to the Pontius Pilate we hear a lot about in our New Testament in Caesarea Maritima.
That was really the only thing they've ever found about Pontius Pilate, right?
That's correct, except for, and in fact, I want to play you a little 8-minute clip of a scholar talking about Pontius Pilate. Except for Josephus, this is another name you're going to get to know, a 1st century Jewish historian mentions him, and so does Philo, who was a Jewish philosopher in Alexandria in northern Africa. Both those guys mention Pontius Pilate. So we do have people talking about him, and then now we actually have this inscription. Yeah. So, let's see here. Before we go into some scripture, let me go here, and let's hear, yes, please.
sorry, Bill,
No, please interrupt me, please.
No, is Herod the Great the Herod of the wise men? The one,
Yes.
and was he the one that also did the
Slaughter.
of the innocents?
Yes.
Okay.
That is exactly right. So the Herods you'll hear about when Jesus is in his ministry, that's his sons. That's the next generation. But during his birth, the wise men, the slaughter of the innocents, that's Herod the Great.
So the Herods, they refer to the Herods, when they came into power, they always took the names of their father.
Yes, that is correct as well. And but the father kind of names the kids and this type of thing. So like Herod Agrippa, yeah, so they get the first and then another name added on.
So the last name first.
I think so. That's a good question. But they definitely were of that family, so the power stayed with that family.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the case of his sons, the Caesar, when Herod dies, says there was a big power battle, and says, okay, I'm going to resolve this by giving each of you different territories. But you're not going to be called king like your dad. So tetrarch, or they came up with other names. So they are, but they're still the Jewish representative, but on behalf of Rome. Now, it won't be too much longer, and Rome will bail on that whole system, and they just put Roman people there. So let's hear a little bit about this stone that was found, and this is kind of a neat little talk about Pontius Pilate. Yeah. Yeah. Volume.
You speak
Alexander in Egypt regarded Pontius Pilate, the governor of Samaria and Judea. And we looked at how Josephus summed him up. Philo, of course, really piles it on, suggesting that Pilate was corrupt, that he was violent, that he had no regard for law and justice. He was more than happy to execute people and so on. Josephus suggested that the man was insensitive and didn't care about Jewish customs and that sort of thing. And then when we come to the Gospels, all four of them in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Pilate doesn't seem to come across quite that way. Pilate seems somewhat uncertain, hesitating, even reluctant to execute Jesus. He wants to know why he should do this. And so some critical scholars think that the Gospels are basically whitewashing Pilate, that they're portraying Pilate in sympathetic terms. It's all part of an apologetic strategy. And so they prefer then the portraits of Pilate given by Philo and Josephus and over the portraits of him in the New Testament Gospels, suggesting that the New Testament Gospels are unhistorical or at best have grossly distorted the way it actually was. Well, I challenge that. We have a very heavy axe to grind in Philo, and we need to recognize that. He has a reason for piling on the criticism on Pontius Pilate. Josephus, too, has his own reasons for portraying Pilate and other Roman governors in a negative light. But what we have in the Gospels is a governor who is not overly interested in Jewish affairs, a governor who doesn't live in Jerusalem. He visits Jerusalem from time to time, usually because of the big holidays, like Passover. But the governor lives in Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean Sea.
This is where we're going to be.
And what we're going to look at is evidence that Pontius Pilate was far more concerned with rebuilding the city, remodeling it, giving a facelift and an upgrade to the harbor and to the facilities that relate to shipping in Caesarea Maritima. Far more concerned with that than he is with what's going on in Jerusalem. In fact, I sometimes say that Pilate is westward facing. He's facing Rome. That's his future, that's his ambition. Not being governor in Judea. So his back is on Jerusalem. He's facing Rome. So how does this, how do we resolve this tension then? Is there actually evidence that the gospel portrait of Pilate, where he's not ready to just acquiesce to the ruling priest demands, that Pilate really recognizes what's going on? Jesus has insulted and embarrassed the ruling priests. They want to take it out on him, have him executed. Pilate is not real sure that he wants to execute a popular preacher on the eve of Passover, just outside the gates of Jerusalem, and possibly provoke the crowd. So Pilate's reluctance is understandable, not because of a commitment to mercy or justice, or not because he's necessarily impressed with Jesus, but because why does he want to inflame the Jewish public? Simply because the ruling priests have become annoyed. So keep that in mind. So I think a critical reading of both the Gospels and Philo and Josephus, I think we can start seeing what really is going on. Well, now let's begin then with an archaeological discovery. We start with Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian writing in Latin at the beginning of the 2nd century, sometime around 110 or 112 AD. And what does he say? Well, he's talking about where the Christian movement came from and where it got its name. And so he talks about Christ, who was put to death by the procurator, Pontius Pilate, and he gives him the title procurator. Now, that is what the Roman governors were called beginning in the year 44. After Herod Agrippa had died, in 44, Roman governors ruled the whole of Israel, the kingdom that at one time Herod the Great had ruled. And for a short while, his grandson, Herod Agrippa, ruled. In other words, not just Samaria and Judea in the south, but also Galilee and Gaulonitis in the north. They were procurators. And so, was Pontius Pilate a procurator when he was governor of Judea and Samaria? Well, a remarkable discovery answers that question. Now, curiously enough, coincidentally enough, in 1960, the great British historian and classicist, Professor A.H.M. Jones, published an essay indicating that on the basis of his research, Pontius Pilate wasn't a procurator at all, as Tacitus said, but rather a prefect. Well, that's just one of those happy things. The very next year, while doing excavations at the theater at Caesarea Maritima, a stone was uncovered. And the stone, a beautiful stone, unfortunately the left side of it chipped away. Fortunately, the stone placed face down when it was reused, thus protecting the rest of the inscription on the right. The inscription identified Pontius Pilate as Pontius or Pontius Pilatus Praefectus Judaea. Pontius Pilate, prefect or governor of Judea. Now this inscription does two things. Not only does it confirm what his true rank was, he's a prefect, not a more exalted form of governor, a procurator, but it also is an indication of his rebuilding and remodeling program over a period of at least 10 years at Caesarea Maritima. And so this is important evidence that indeed he was preoccupied with building activities at Caesarea Maritima. And he wasn't that concerned about what was going on in Jerusalem. That fell more to his Jewish colleague, Caiaphas. And so the gospel portrait of Pilate arriving from out of town, not current with what's going on in Jerusalem, finding out that there's somebody called Jesus of Nazareth who has offended the ruling priests, who is then brought before him with the ruling priest demanding he be put to death. I can see how Pilate would be cautious, wondering, is he getting into trouble? Is he going to get ambushed here? Is he going to become the fall guy for putting to death a popular preacher and, according to rumor, healer on the eve of Passover, right outside the gates of Jerusalem, where all the pilgrims coming to visit Jerusalem and participate in the Passover sacrifice and holiday? Does he really want to get blamed for that? Another example of Roman cruelty and oppression? I can understand how Pilate would have some hesitation here and why he wants to know, what crime has he really done that deserves death? And at the end of the day, as Matthew explicitly states, he washes his hands and he allows the people to cry out what to do with Jesus. The ruling priests, of course, encourage their friends and supporters, locals, probably elite of Jerusalem, to condemn him and call for his death. I think the Gospels have told the story accurately. Sure, there's apologetic at work, but the Gospels have given a very fair statement of the dynamics at work. And the Pilate stone, as it's usually called, on display in the Israel Museum and a replica on display at Caesarea Maritima, the Pilate stone helps us sort this out. We know not only what Pilate's true rank was, but we also have a sense of where he was more occupied and more concerned, namely at Caesarea Maritima with building projects and part of his ambition for, I think, promotion and perhaps returning to Italy, than his concern with Jewish matters, religious matters, temple matters, and what all was going on in Jerusalem.
Okay, so my summary of what you want.
Now, in the previous lecture, we looked at how
what you want to get out of that is that that stone confirms that the attitude in the Gospels of Pontius Pilate as being this ambivalent, like, I don't know if I want to, really torn, makes a lot of sense if we think about him as a prefect who, a prefect is smaller, it's not as big of a position, who's trying to please Rome so that he can keep ascending the ladder. Anyway, that's kind of my summary of what that is. But so when you get to Caesarea Maritima, you want to think about Herod the Great and Pontius Pilate. That's two, okay? So let's add some more.
I got a question.
Please, but let me, please, questions.
So did he stay more in Caesarea, or did he?
Yes, he lived in Caesarea, would visit Jerusalem.
So when Christ acted, he was visiting.
Correct. He's going there, it's the Passover, he's kind of the person in charge, but then there's the local person in charge. Caiaphas that's mentioned is the chief priest. So, and then, so it gets a little bit complicated, but yes, he lived in Caesarea, and he would have traveled to Jerusalem. And now you'll have a little bit of an idea by being there of what those distances are and whatnot.
Pastor Bill,
please.
do either Philo or Josephus say what happened to Pilate after Jesus was crucified?
I don't know that, yeah. I don't know that. Yeah, I know they talk about Philo's very upset at him because of the things he's done and to the Jewish people, and so really, like Craig said, he piles it on, really makes him out to be a total tyrant, so, but I don't know. Now, Philo doesn't mention anything about Jesus. Now, Josephus does. And then isn't it interesting that this quote from, about around 100 AD starts mentioning Christians. So, all right.
It's not unusual for people to drop out of the story. Even Joseph, Jesus' father, drops out of the story.
Right.
We're so used to newspaper reporting, we want all the details.
Right, and we don't know what happened. So, but yeah, so good. Other questions about Pontius Pilate? So, one cool thing is it's interesting, some people well, there's no history, it's all kind of made up. Well, this guy existed. We know for sure.
But Patrick, did they also take Jesus to see Herod?
They did.
And where was Herod?
Well, Herod Agrippa.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
Herod is I'm assuming he's in Jerusalem.
He is also in Jerusalem?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
He's kind of been put in charge of that section. And then Philip had another section, I forget, I even get confused. But that article on the Herods is really helpful there. Yeah, please.
I'm going on a very short bird walk here.
Yeah.
What I find sometimes troublesome as I read it is that some of the characters
Yeah,
in the Bible are there to fulfill the prophecy, and I kind of feel like they were scapegoats in history.
yeah, yeah.
I always said that Thomas was my favorite because he's the one who actually got to see it all.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, I don't know, but where would we be without the Herods and the Pilates?
That's right. They are all swept up into this amazing event. No, it is, and they weren't robots. They were human beings that were making decisions, and yet God is still steering through all these decisions.
Go through,
Yeah.
but go back to the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and everything is fulfilling a prophecy,
Yeah.
and that just,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, I'm done.
Well, no, that's good. Let's keep thinking about that, and let's keep thinking. I think that oftentimes after the fact, like the gospel writers say, and this happened to fulfill, but would they have known that they were doing it to fulfill at the time is a question too. But anyway, yeah, you've got me thinking there, so
Hurts
good.
my head today, I give it to you.
Judas is a classic example of that. I mean,
Yeah.
wasn't he just a, somebody had to betray Jesus, so why is it his fault? You know, I mean, yeah. All right, so another thing when it comes to Caesarea, because we got to get to Mount Carmel, which is my goal by 1:30. So, so we're not going to read all of these stories, but if you want to make a new card now, or if you still got room, you want to put Acts 10, verse 1, because this is the whole story that I talked about with the gospel going to the Gentiles. Now, think about the place now, because you've probably heard, maybe, depending on how versed you are, and it's okay if you haven't, but Peter has this vision of all the foods coming down and being made clean, and that God shows no partiality now, that the gospel is for the Gentile just like for the Jew. Where does this happen? It happens in Joppa and Caesarea, which are the doorway to the rest of the world. And that's something that before I went there I didn't really think about. I just thought they were just a place. But this centurion is this God-fearing man, lives in Caesarea Philippi. I keep saying Philippi, that's a different Caesarea. Caesarea Maritima. And so that's an important story. You'll want to read that. I mean, we don't have time to pour over it because I want to get to Paul and being in prison and stuff. But that's another. If you want to link something with the Bible to where we're going to be, that's important. Now there is a spot in Joppa here that that's the Simon, the tanner's house, but I don't think there's much confidence that it's actually the house. You know, all of the sites we're going to see, some of them are like, for sure. Some of them are like 90%. Some of them are like, well, we don't know, maybe. So that's one that I think there's a lot of skepticism about. But some people still hold that was there. But we know where Joppa is. The city's in the same spot it was 2,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yes.
When you say that those two places were the door, are you saying that's because they were port cities
Yes.
and trade routes?
Yes. Yes. And very much more of the Gentile world. Yes. Yeah.
Wouldn't there be some significance to going to the house of a tanner, which is a dirty profession? Because they're dealing with
unclean animals, probably.
animals,
Yes,
and
nice.
I think urine is used in the process.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It's
Something,
very, yeah. So that's even more of an offense type of thing, just the very setting. That's really helpful. That's good. Yeah. So the other thing that happens that I found really powerful, let's see here if I'm, okay, so let me go back to my, that's chapter 10 is the Peter thing. Let's go to chapter 21, and it's a long story, like 21 through 26. We're just going to read a small section of it today. But this is where we've got Paul back in the mix. So let me get to chapter 21 here. So the book of Acts is very much focused on Peter and Paul. Sometimes we talk about Peter being the person to go to the Jewish people and Paul being the one to the Gentile people. That's more of a Paul's assessment than the book of Acts. The book of Acts has them both, doing ministry in those contexts.
It's all yours.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it very much. We'll take it from here.
And the other building's all locked.
Thank you. Perfect. Paul begins to preach and he gets in trouble. And the Jewish authorities who are upset at him now, because he's really, he was the one that was their guy that was going to go out and bring all these Christians to task for messing up, the faith. And he becomes a Christian. He gets this call. And so now he runs into the Jewish authorities and other authorities. And so he, he starts finding himself in trouble, but I think 21 is way too far back. I must have messed that up. Let me just go to 26. Here we go. So you might want to scratch out 21. But so where we kind of pick up is in, let's see, I'm thinking, let me just go back. Yes, 25 and 26. Chapters 25 and 26. So Paul's making a defense and he's thrown in jail. And let's read right starting about. Let's go right here. After several days had passed, King Agrippa, I've heard a little bit about that, and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. Now Festus is the new Pontius Pilate. Okay, he's the new governor, prefect person. Since they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There's a man here who was left in prison by Felix." Okay, now how long was he left in prison? For 2 years. Paul is in prison in Caesarea Philippi. Now, let me see if I can achieve good. I did it again. Caesarea Maritima. Thank you. If I say Caesarea Philippi, just disregard that.
Just say Caesarea.
Caesarea. So there's the trip from Jerusalem up to Caesarea. So Paul is taken from the conflict in Jerusalem up to Caesarea, and he's put in prison, and the prefect, it's hard because you got Felix and Festus, but one of just says they puts him in jail and just forgets about him. Well, where is that? Let me see if I can go back just a little bit. You see right behind this gentleman who is our guide, these are for sure the spots where the jails were. So right here, right by this beautiful city, beautiful palace is where the jails were. And so that's where Paul was imprisoned for, and so when you get there, you know, it's like, okay, what's the big deal about this? Here's the Pilate Stone. Well, right over here is where Paul was imprisoned for 2 years. And so it's an interesting thing. When I was in, so he's making his case. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and had been given the opportunity to make a defense against the charge. So here the Roman authorities are playing the mediator here. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of a disagreement with him about their own religion. So he sees this as a squabble between Jewish factions. And about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive.
Is this Festus talking?
So this is, I believe, is Festus. Felix left him in prison, now Festus is talking. Okay, so he was left in prison by Felix for these 2 years, which is what happens before this, so if you go back. But now, so this is Festus who's talking. And he's saying, this is why we're here and this is what's going on. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. Then something really interesting happened. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the emperor. Agrippa said to Festus, so that's the Jewish authority, says to Festus, the Roman authority, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. And so Paul is brought before Agrippa. This is still happening in Caesarea Maritima.
And Agrippa is Herod?
Yes.
Junior?
Yes. Herod Jr. Yes, exactly. And so they have this this whole trial there in Caesarea, and if we skip down a little bit, Agrippa says to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself, and then Paul stretched out his hand and began to defend himself. And he gives this really, I think, very moving defense of the faith, and then the part about the resurrection of Jesus, because that's really the issue. That is the core. So Paul gives quite a long, he tells his story. So if you want to know what's Paul's story and whatnot, it goes on. But what Paul does here at some point is he actually then makes a case, hey Agrippa, maybe you should become a Christian. I love this here. Let me just read a part of this. Agrippa says to Paul, "Are you so quickly persuading me to become a Christian?" Paul replied, "Whether quickly or not, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become as I am, except for these chains." So it's a great story. It happens there at Caesarea, and I want you to, read up on it so that when you get there, all of that can kind of come flooding back. What Paul does then, however, is to resolve this issue, because he's a Roman citizen, he says, "I appeal to Caesar." And because of that, Festus has to send him where? To Rome. Paul takes the faith to Rome. Although when he's there, Christians have already made it to Rome. But he gets to Rome, and that's where he dies. But that's kind of the fulfillment of the story of Acts. It starts in Jerusalem and goes to the ends of the world, to Rome. That's the story of Acts, is the spread of the faith. And again, Caesarea is the launching point. So anyway, so there you go. There's some stuff. You've got Herod, you've got Pontius Pilate, you've got Peter and Paul. Caesarea Maritima. First thing we're going to do. Question.
Is this the actual Bible?
Yes, you're looking at the New Revised Standard Version. Yeah.
This is sounding a little un-Bible-ish,
Right.
It's not the King James,
Yeah.
but it's the really great English translation of the. It's the one we use in church. Yeah.
It doesn't mention pizza.
I'm kind of racing through it. So again, now I'm at 26. So if you think about chapter 25 and 26, read that story so that you can really know what goes on in Caesarea. It's a lovely. This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to the emperor. So like Paul, if he'd have just shut up, he would have been set free. But he didn't want to be set free. He knew what he was doing. And so off he goes. Paul sails to Rome. Okay?
Well, like Jesus probably could have been separated.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's right. Great
So
point.
Paul's meaning, he wants to take it to Rome, he wants to take the show.
Yeah. Yeah, that's his, it's definitely his thought. He's had lots of journeys already by this time, and this is towards the end of the book of Acts, and this is his trip.
Wasn't there some rule about his citizenship keeping him free, or should have kept him free? Am I mistaken?
Well, there's a couple things. Very likely, what comes to my mind is that there's a couple times where he gets beat up, and then they find out he's a Roman citizen. Holy buckets, we could be executed for doing this to a Roman citizen, because he had his citizenship, even though he's Jewish. And then here, he has the authority, he has the power, because of that citizenship. I want the Caesar to decide. And so he, by appealing to Caesar, goes to Rome. So that's what comes to my mind, but yeah.
Now, how did he become a Roman citizen, was he?
Yeah, a lot of people debate and wonder about that, and it would have happened, I don't know if one of his parents, how that worked. We know he was a Pharisee. He talks about his own story, and so that's a great question. That'd be fun to look into.
That's be interesting.
Wasn't he born in Turkey?
That's a good, I don't know about that. Yeah, it's a good question. But see, these are good questions. Google it. Yes.
You said Peter, but did I miss something?
Peter is in Acts 10. He's the Peter and Cornelius, the vision of the fire coming down. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's kind of that's part of the centurion that Peter is working with. That whole story comes from Caesarea. And so that's the first part. But the big part is Paul being
Is
in
this
jail.
the Paul that was Saul?
Yes.
And so wouldn't he have been a Roman official? Wasn't he a tax
Saul
collector?
is the Jewish name. And Paul is the Greek name, or the.
Oh.
So that, and a lot of people say, well, he was Saul, he was Jewish, and then when he became a Christian, he changed his name to Paul. That's really more of a coincidence in the teaching that I've received. It's just that now he's going to the Gentiles, so they're using his Gentile name, Paul. But the Jewish name for Paul is Saul.
Wasn't he a tax collector? Worked for the Romans?
No.
No, that
No.
was Zacchaeus, the little guy.
He
Yeah,
was a highly educated Pharisee.
yeah, he studied under Gamaliel, he says. There's a couple spots, maybe I can get you some passages to get some more background, where he does his own biography. He does his own, like, well, I'm this, and I'm this, and you know, so he was a Pharisee, for sure, yeah. Keeper of the law, he was a part of that Jewish,
Inner circle.
yeah, circle. I was going to say sect, but it wasn't a sect. There are about 5 different parts of Judaism, which I'll teach you at another time, because when we get further down the road, we'll talk about the different kinds of Judaism there was. Okay, we have 10 minutes, and we're going to Mount Carmel now. Okay? So, a new card, definitely new card.
Anybody else need, there's
If
extra
you need
five
more,
in here, and there's
you
definitely.
need more cards.
Like the kids, I'll say, raise your hands.
Yeah. So, because if you look at your map, we're headed to the Sea of Galilee now. We're moving from the coast over to the Sea of Galilee, and what's right in between?
What day is it?
This is still day 1. We haven't left day 1 yet. Well, it's actually day 3, but it's the first day where we're starting to do stuff.
Yeah,
First 2 days are actually travel days, technically, because it takes 2 days to go there, 1 day to come back, because of the time things. So, but, you know, so in your book, it's like officially called day 3, but it's our first day on the ground doing stuff. So, does it sound like a lot already? It's, yeah, good. All right, so we're going to go and we're going to drive up to this great, huge mountain. None of the mountains there are mountains in our from the Olympics, okay? So, but Mount Carmel is a famous mountain in the Old Testament. What happens there? So my title here, if you want to write this, is To Limp or Not to Limp? This is the question. All right, why do I say this?
Is that when Jacob fought God?
Well, that's interesting. Jacob got a limp, didn't he?
Yeah.
But a guy named Elijah is going to say this to Ahab and Jezebel. So Mount Carmel, you want to put Ahab and Jezebel, and there's the spelling there. And Ahab, by this time in the history of Israel, this is after King David and Solomon and the division of the northern and southern kingdoms. You have this split that happens. And Ahab is the king of Israel. He's the king of the north, not the south, which was Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. But, you know, everything above Jerusalem, just go up, is Israel, known as Israel. And Ahab is the king. And he marries Jezebel. Jezebel is not an Israelite, and she is a real advocate for Baal worship. She, now, but what is, you might say, well, what's that? So if you want to put Baals, B-A-A-L down, those are fertility gods. Baal is like a summary of all the different fertility gods. And this kind of religion was that you did stuff on earth to get the gods to do stuff up in heaven so that it would rain. I won't get any more explicit than that. And that it would make the earth fertile. And so these were the basis of most of the religions before the Hebrews, before the Israelites came into the Promised Land. So Ahab and Jezebel marry. And the prophet of the Old Testament is Elijah. His person that comes after him is named Elisha. S-H instead of J. Elijah and Elisha. Well, we're talking about Elijah. And Elijah's going to have a shootout with the Baals on Mount Carmel. And so I had to put a little thing there. But this is probably better. And so we've got just a, man, we're going to run out of time. That's all right. We've got to read just a little bit of this. So where you want to go in 1 Kings is 1 Kings chapter 18. And, yeah. And so what Elijah does here, just to set this up, let's see how far do I want to go. So Elijah's basically saying to Ahab, look, you got to cut this out. You got to stop leading God's people into the worship of these Baals and to idolatry. And, so he confronts, so you got a prophet confronting the king in a very direct way, which is kind of a big deal. I love this. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "It is you, you troubler of Israel," he answered. "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." So Ahab, is saying, you're the troubler of Israel. No, you are. It's you are. And so he's calling him on account for these Baals. Now therefore I have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel. So now when you read this story, it's like you're going to have been there. And with 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, that's the female of the Baal gods, who eat at Jezebel's table. So he sets this big showdown. So you've got that written deal because you're going to have to go read some of it. So here's what was set up. Elijah says to him, we're going to build these 2 altars of wood, and you call and pray to the Baals to come and, start it on fire and burn it up and the whole business. And it's a duel. And then see how you do, and then I'll have mine, and we'll see how I do. And the Baals, there's this great, this is great. At noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, surely he is a god. Either he's meditating, or he has wandered away, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened." Because, the Baals, nothing's happened. So he's taunting them. Then he cried aloud, it was their custom, and they cut themselves with swords and lances until blood gushed out over them. In other words, they're trying to get the gods to respond. We've seen this in other places and cultures. Nothing happens. And so then Elijah says, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. First he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." So he connects this to their story. With the stones he built an altar with the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around the altar, large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Next he put wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. He said, "Fill your jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." What's he doing?
Trying to make it so that it won't light.
Right. He soaks it with water. He's up in the ante. Then he said,
trick.
That's right. Do it a second time. And they did it a second time. Do it a third time. They did it a third time. And the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. At the time of the offering of the oblation, the prophet Elijah came near and said, "O Lord God of Abraham and Isaac and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding." And what happens? Then fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord indeed is God. The Lord indeed is God." And then we do away with those prophets of Baal who lost. Now what's happening too around this is that there is a drought. A huge and horrible drought. And what you're going to be able to see is what happens here. You'll be able to walk to one side, because, let's see. Elijah said they have go up and eat and drink, for there's a sound of rushing rain. And Ahab went up to eat and drink. So he's still trying to get through to Ahab. Elijah went up to the mount of Carmel, and there he bowed himself down upon the earth and put his face between his knees, and he said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." So one of those pictures that you saw, let's see, I think I've got it here, you'll be able to get up there and look towards the sea. It was too hazy for me to see the sea, but you could. Look out there. There's nothing, Ahab says. Go 7 times. And the 7th time he said, look, a little cloud no bigger than a person's hand is rising out of the sea. And then he said, go say to Ahab, harness your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. And anyway, the rain comes and the drought ends. And so again, all of this happens on Mount Carmel. So there you go. That's a great way to prepare, is to read through this scripture. I want to finish today by telling you why you're doing what you're doing. Our faith, the Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian faith, although there are lots of stories, some that might even come into the category of myth, depending on how you want to look at it, but our faith is a historical faith. We believe because something happened in a particular place at a particular time in history. If those events don't happen, we're not here. And so you're going to go to Israel and you're going to get your feet on the ground where the events of our faith happen. That is a powerful thing. Your faith will get more concrete and be more grounded. And certainly you're going to be able to read stories like this and say, wow, I was there. I know exactly what that looks like. Okay? All right. We got to end. 1:30. Thank you. Take as many note cards as you want. We'll be here to ask any questions. We meet again in October. If you have other questions about this story, just come. I'll be here, but I want to respect our time. So go in peace. Thank you. I'm so excited. We're so excited.
Thank you.
You bet.
So our next meeting is Sunday, October 21st, and then we won't meet again till January.